The clock tower stood silent in the center of the snow-covered square. Its four faces, dark and still, were like four closed eyes turned to the four corners of the small town. The snow fell in large, slow flakes, with no wind, gathering on the rooftops, on the iron benches, and on the bare branches of the trees. The only sound was the nearly imperceptible whisper of the flakes touching the ground, a sound that was more an absence of other noises than a sound in itself. Inside his small workshop across the square, Elias watched the tower through the window. The glass was cold to the touch and slightly fogged by his breath. Maybe this is just another one of those quiet stories, made to help you relax. And sometimes that's all we really need. The clock hadn't worked for years. No one remembered exactly when it had stopped. Simply one day, its deep and constant ticking vanished from the town's life. Its chimes, which once marked the hours of day and night, had become a memory. The tower was now just a stone structure, beautiful but empty, a monument to a time that was no longer measured. And on that night, with the snow blanketing everything in a silent white mantle, the clock's absence felt deeper, heavier. The square seemed incomplete, like a sentence without a period. Elias set his teacup down on the workbench, next to small gears and delicate tools. He was a clockmaker. His life was dedicated to small mechanisms, to the springs and hands that measured minutes and seconds. But the great clock in the tower was different. It was the heart of the town, and its heart had stopped. A gentle uneasiness, which he had felt for a long time, grew inside him that night. It wasn't anxiety, but rather a sudden clarity. The tower's silence was no longer just a part of the landscape. It had become an imbalance, something that needed to be corrected. He decided it would be tonight. There was no reason to wait for daylight, for anyone's help, or for an order from the town council. The snow created a perfect stillness, a world apart where such a task seemed possible, almost necessary. He stood up and went to an old wooden chest in the corner of the workshop. He opened it. The smell of old oil and cold metal rose up to him. Inside, wrapped in soft cloths, were the larger, heavier tools that belonged to his grandfather, the last man to care for the great clock. Beside them, a long, heavy iron key, the key to the tower. Elias picked up the key. Its weight in his hand was substantial, real. It was a promise, the promise that the silence could be broken, the promise that the hands could move again. He imagined the sound of the first chime rolling across the snow-covered square, a clear, pure sound. He pictured the light turning on behind the clock faces, a warm golden glow visible through the falling flakes. This image gave him a calm and steady purpose. He wasn't just going to fix a mechanism. He was going to give the town back its rhythm, its steady pulse. He put on a thick coat, a wool hat, and gloves. He placed the most important tools in a sturdy canvas bag, along with a long oil lantern and a small flask of kerosene. He slung the bag over his shoulder. The weight was comforting. Before leaving, he looked one more time at the tower through the window. It remained dark, silent, a shadow against the pale night sky. But now, looking at it, Elias didn't feel melancholy. He felt the beginning of a task. He opened the door of his workshop, and the cold night air touched his face. The sound of his footsteps in the fresh snow was the first movement toward the silent tower. The crossing of the square was slow and deliberate. The snow was deep and soft, completely muffling the sound of his boots. Each step was a gentle sinking, followed by a soft sigh of compressing snow. The light from the few lamps in the square cast yellowish circles on the pristine white, and the snowflakes that passed through these circles looked like tiny sparks of light dancing in the air. Elias kept his gaze fixed at the base of the tower, a dark mass of stone rising before him. The cold was intense but dry, and he felt it on his cheeks and the tip of his nose. It wasn't an uncomfortable cold, it was just a part of the night, a part of the task. He reached the door. It was made of dark wood, with bands of black iron studded across its surface. Snow had gathered at the threshold and around the edges of the lock. He took off his gloves and put them in his pocket. The metal of the large iron key was icy against the skin of his hand. He blew into the lock to melt any ice that might have formed and inserted the key. The mechanism was stiff from disuse. He had to use both hands and the strength of his shoulders to turn it. There was a metallic click, loud and sharp in the silence of the square, followed by a deep groan as the door unlocked. He pushed. The door opened slowly, revealing total darkness and a puff of cold, still air, carrying the scent of dust, damp stone, and forgotten time. It was a different smell from the crisp, clean air outside. It was the smell of a closed-off, sleeping place. Elias stepped inside and closed the door behind him, plunging into the darkness. The sound of the square vanished, replaced by a dense, profound silence. He set his tool bag on the stone floor and lit his oil lantern. The flame flickered for a moment and then steadied, casting a warm, trembling circle of light that danced on the walls. Before him, a spiral staircase began, made of stone steps worn by time. The lantern light revealed that the walls were covered in a thin layer of dust and old cobwebs. Elias picked up the lantern and his bag and began to climb. His footsteps echoed softly in the confined space. With every turn of the stair, a small slit-like window appeared in the wall, showing a glimpse of the snowy night outside. Through them he saw the flakes falling in silence, a contrast to the closed, dusty environment of the tower. The climb was long, the steps were uneven, and he had to be careful where he placed his feet. The air grew colder and colder as he ascended. Finally, the staircase ended on a small wooden platform. Before him was another door, smaller and simpler. He opened it and entered the mechanism room. The space was surprisingly large, circular, with dark wooden beams crossing the high ceiling. In the center, motionless and covered with a thick layer of gray dust, was the great clock mechanism. It was a complex mountain of brass and iron gears, wheels, levers, and counterweights, all silent and still. It looked like a sleeping giant. Elias placed the lantern on a bracket on the wall, illuminating part of the room. The air was frigid. He could see his own breath forming small clouds in the air. The silence in here was different from the silence of the square. It was a mechanical silence, the absence of a sound that should have been there, the ticking. He approached the mechanism. He ran his finger over one of the large gears, leaving a clean trail in the dust. The task before him was immense. Before he could think of fixing whatever was broken, he needed to see what he was dealing with, and for that, he first needed to clean, to bring the machine back into the light. He opened his tool bag and took out a soft bristled brush and a clean cloth. The first step was set. The cleaning would be his starting point. With the mechanism room lit by the steady glow of the oil lantern, Elias began the work of cleaning. He decided to approach the task methodically, starting from the top of the mechanism and slowly working his way down. The accumulated dust was thick and fine, like a gray velvet that covered every surface. He took the soft bristled brush and began to pass it gently over the highest gears. The dust came loose in small clouds that danced in the lantern's beam before settling slowly on the floor. The sound of the brush on the metal surface was a dry whisper, the only sound in the room besides his own calm breathing. He worked without hurry. Every tooth of every gear was brushed with care. He wasn't just removing the dirt, he was rediscovering the machine. Under the layer of dust, the brass of some parts revealed a dull gleam, and the iron of others showed its dark, solid color. He found small tool marks left by his grandfather, little signatures of his care. They were details no one else would ever see, but for Elias, they were a connection, a continuation of a work begun long ago. He felt the weight of the tool in his hand, the repetitive, calming motion of his arm. After cleaning a section, he used a soft cotton cloth to wipe away the finer residue. The cloth quickly turned gray. He would fold it to a clean section and continue. His attention was completely focused on the task. The world outside, the snow, the sleeping town, all of it faded away. His universe was this room, this warm light, and this complex machine that was slowly emerging from its long slumber. He could feel the texture of the cold metal through the cloth, the smoothness of a polished surface, the roughness of a cast piece. They were small sensations that kept him present, anchored in the moment. After cleaning the main gears, he moved on to the more delicate parts, the thin levers, the springs, and the counterweight chains. For these, he used smaller brushes, the kind he used in his workshop for wristwatches. With them, he could reach into the corners and crevices where the dust was most stubborn. As he worked, he noticed that the old oil had dried and hardened in many of the joints, mixing with the dust to form a thick paste that impeded movement. This was likely one of the main reasons the clock had stopped. He took a small vial of a gentle solvent and applied a few drops with an eyedropper into each stiff joint. He let the liquid work for a few minutes, and then, with a clean cloth and a small wooden spatula, he carefully removed the softened grime. It was slow, patient work. Each clean joint was a small step forward. After cleaning, he took his can of clock oil, a thin, clear oil. With a fine-tipped applicator, he placed a single drop on each pivot point, on every axle. The drop of oil spread over the clean metal, a small gleam of new life. The scent of the fresh oil mixed with the ancient smell of the room, creating an aroma of renewal. Hours passed. Elias didn't feel the time passing. He was immersed in the rhythm of his work. Clean, solvent, clean again, oil. He repeated this process dozens of times, moving around the mechanism, treating each part with the same care and attention. The machine before him was transformed. What was once a gray and motionless mass was now a structure of gleaming metal, ready to move. The dust on the floor was a testament to the work done. The entire room seemed lighter, more awake. The preparatory work was nearly complete. The machine was clean. Now he could begin to search for the true fault. With the mechanism cleaned and lubricated,
Elias could finally begin his detailed inspection. He knew that the heart of any pendulum clock is the escapement, the small, ingenious mechanism that translates the swing of the pendulum into the intermittent movement of the gears. It is the escapement that creates the characteristic tick-tock sound. He took a small watchmaker's loop and fitted it to his eye, leaning in close to the part of the mechanism where the escapement was located. The lantern's light focused on a small set of levers and a gear wheel with peculiarly shaped teeth, the escape wheel. He examined each piece. He saw that the cleaning had revealed the problem. One of the two small pallets on the anchor's anchor, the part that engages and disengages the teeth of the escape wheel, was slightly chipped at its tip. It was a minuscule flaw, almost invisible to the naked eye, but in a precision mechanism like this, it was enough to jam the entire system. The chipped pallet couldn't release the tooth of the escape wheel cleanly, causing the mechanism to get stuck at one point in its cycle. He sighed softly. It was not a sigh of dismay, but of understanding. Now he knew what to do. Fortunately, he had anticipated that he might find worn or damaged parts. In his bag, he had a small leather case with a few replacement parts his grandfather had crafted years. They were raw parts which needed to be custom fitted. He opened the case and found a new pallet, a small piece of polished metal. The next step was to replace the damaged piece. It was a job of extreme delicacy. He used a tiny screwdriver to loosen the screw holding the anchor in place. With a pair of tweezers, he carefully lifted the entire escapement assembly out. He took the piece to a small stone ledge on the wall, which he used as a makeshift workbench. Under the lantern's light, he worked to remove the chipped pallet from the anchor. The screw was tight. He had to apply firm, steady pressure to loosen it without damaging the part. Finally, the screw gave way with a tiny pop. He removed the old pallet and set the new one in its place. The new piece was slightly larger than necessary, as it was meant to be. Now came the hardest part, filing it down to the exact size and angle.
From his bag, he took out a small jeweler's file, as thin as a needle. And then, with slow, precise strokes, he began to file away the excess metal. The sound of the file on the metal was a high, thin whine. Every few strokes, he would stop, blow away the metal dust, and check the fit with his loop. This process took a very long time. It required a steady hand and infinite patience. One false move and the piece would be ruined. He was completely focused, his breath slow and even. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the pallet was perfect. He reassembled the escapement and carefully reinstalled it in the clock's mechanism. He tightened the screw, ensuring it was firm but not too tight. With the escapement in place, he turned his attention to the pendulum. It was a solid brass disc the size of a large dinner plate, suspended from a long metal rod. He checked the suspension at the top, a thin steel spring that allowed the pendulum to swing freely. The spring was in good condition. He wiped the pendulum disc with a soft cloth until it shone. Now, the most critical part of the mechanism was repaired and ready. The heart of the clock was ready to beat again. After repairing the heart of the mechanism, Elias knew the next task was to ensure the clock's voice was also ready. The chimes were as important as the time it kept. They were how the clock spoke to the town. To inspect the chime mechanism, he had to climb one more level inside the tower. A narrow, almost vertical wooden ladder led from the mechanism room to a platform above, the bell chamber. As he climbed, the air became even colder. The bell chamber was not an enclosed space like the room below. It was open to the elements through 4 large stone arches, one on each face of the tower. The wind blew softly through them, carrying in a few snowflakes that melted on the wooden floor. In the center of the chamber, suspended from massive beams, was the great bronze bell. It was enormous, with a blue-green patina that told of its age. Elias stood for a moment admiring it, a silent, imposing shape against the night sky. Next to the bell was the chime mechanism, a set of levers and steel cables connected to a large iron hammer. This mechanism was linked via a long rod to the clock in the room below. When the clock reached the proper hour, a lever would release the hammer, which would then strike the bell. Elias inspected the hammer. It was covered in surface rust, but it seemed solid. He examined the pivot point of the hammer and noticed it was stiff. Once again, the old oil had dried up, mixed with the moisture that entered through the arches.
He took a wire brush from his bag and began to scrub the hammer and its mechanism vigorously, removing the rust and grime. The metallic scraping of the brush echoed in the bell chamber. Flakes of rust fell to the floor. After a thorough cleaning, he applied a thicker, more resilient oil, designed for parts exposed to the weather. He moved the hammer back and forth by hand, feeling the movement become more smooth and free with each drop of oil. Next, he checked the steel cable that connected the hammer to the main mechanism. He ran his gloved hand along the length of the cable, feeling for any signs of fraying or broken strands. The cable was in good condition. It just needed to be tightened. With time and disuse, it had become slightly slack. This would mean that when the mechanism pulled it, some of the force would be lost, resulting in a weak, dull chime. He found the tensioner, a type of long screw, and used a wrench to tighten it. He turned it slowly, a quarter turn at a time, testing the cable's tension after each adjustment. He wanted it taut, but not too tight, to allow for a quick, crisp movement. When he was satisfied with the tension, he did a last check. He inspected the surface of the bell at the point where the hammer struck it. There was a worn spot, but the surface was smooth. He ran his hand over the icy bronze, feeling its solidity. Everything seemed to be in order. He couldn't test the chime yet. That would only happen when the clock was running, but he had done everything he could to ensure that when the time came, the clock's voice would be clear and strong. He climbed back down the ladder to the mechanism room, leaving the great bell waiting in silence in the wind-swept chamber, ready to sing again. The last part of the mechanical work was at the very top of the tower, behind the 4 clock faces. Elias had to climb a final ladder, even narrower and steeper, which brought him to a small circular space just beneath the tower's pointed roof. This was the heart of the clock's visual identity. 4 large panels of opal glass formed the walls of this little room, each with Roman numerals painted in black on the outside. In the center, the main axle of the mechanism rose from the floor, splitting into 4 to move the large hands on each face. The space was tight. Elias had to move carefully to avoid bumping into the mechanism for the hands. His first task was to clean the inside of the glass panels.
As the grime came away, the light from the street lamps in the square below began to filter through the glass, a diffuse pale glow. He cleaned each of the 4 panels with the same care, rinsing the cloth in the icy water of the bucket. The air at the top of the tower was biting, but he hardly noticed, focused on his work. When he finished, the space felt brighter, more open. He could see the outlines of the town's snow-covered rooftops through the translucent numerals. Now for the light. In the center of the room, mounted around the main axle, was an old illumination system. It was a large oil lantern with 4 wicks designed to cast a uniform light in all directions. It was covered with dust, and its oil reservoir was dry and empty. The lantern's glass chimney was black with old soot. He carefully disassembled the lantern. He took the glass chimney and wiped it with a cloth until it was completely transparent. Then he opened the reservoir. The old wick was charred and spent. He removed it and put in a new, thick wick he had brought with him. Next, he took his flask of kerosene and filled the lantern's reservoir. The clean, pungent smell of the kerosene filled the small space. He made sure the new wick was well soaked in the fuel. He reassembled the lantern, placing the clean glass chimney back in its place. Everything was ready. He took a box of matches from his coat pocket. He struck one. The small flame trembled in the cold air. He brought it to the wick. The wick caught fire instantly, producing a tall, yellowish flame. He used the small adjustment knob to lower the wick until the flame became a steady, smokeless, golden light. The light filled the small room, casting his shadow and the shadow of the central mechanism on the 4 faces of the clock. The inside of the tower was now alive with a warm light. From outside, from the square, the clock's dials would no longer be dark holes in the night. They would be soft beacons, visible from all over town. Elias felt a deep satisfaction. The mechanics were repaired, the voice was ready, and the light was lit. All the pieces were in place. Now only one thing remained: to give the first push, the first breath of life to the sleeping giant. He descended the ladders, back to the main mechanism room, his heart beating with a calm, expectant rhythm. Back in the main room, the warm glow from the top of the tower filtered through the cracks in the wooden floor, joining the light of his own lantern. The clean, oiled mechanism glinted softly. All preparations were complete. The moment had come. Elias approached the great pendulum. The brass disc was motionless, hanging in perfect silence. He took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs. Then, with both hands, he pulled the great pendulum disc to one side, as far as its rod would allow. He held it there for a moment, feeling its potential energy, its weight begging to be released. And then he let go. The pendulum began its long, graceful arc. There was a moment of silence as it traveled to the other side, and then the sound. A solid, definitive click as the escapement's anchor engaged the first tooth of the escape wheel. The pendulum continued its swing, and as it returned, there was the corresponding sound, an equally clear clack. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound filled the room. It was a slow, heavy, immensely steady sound. It was the sound of time beginning to move again. Elias stepped back and watched. The gears, which had been still for years, began their slow, interconnected dance. One wheel turned slowly, moving another, which in turn moved another. The great clock was alive. He looked at the small control dial on the wall, which replicated what the exterior dial showed. The hands were moving. He had set the time before starting the pendulum,
using the time on his own pocket watch. It was nearly 2 in the morning. He sat down on a wooden crate in the corner of the room and simply listened. The ticking was constant, hypnotic. It was a sound that filled the silence without disturbing it. It was a sound of order, of purpose. He watched the counterweights descend an almost imperceptible distance with each swing of the pendulum. Everything was working in harmony. He waited. The minutes passed, each one marked by the advance of the longer hand. As the hand approached the 12, he felt a growing anticipation. He saw a series of levers being slowly lifted by the mechanism, and then, at the exact moment the hour changed, the final lever was released. There was a sound of mechanical release, and then a moment of silence, and then from above came the sound of the chime. Bong! The sound was deep and resonant. It vibrated through the wooden floor, through the air, through Elias's own body. It was a rich, full sound that seemed to make the tower itself hum. After a pause, the second one came. Bong! 2 chimes, marking 2 in the morning. The sound rolled out of the tower, through the arches of the bell chamber, and spread across the silent, snow-covered square. Elias closed his eyes, just listening. When the echo of the last chime faded away, the only sound that remained was the steady ticking. The work was done. He packed his tools in his bag, extinguished his lantern, and began to descend the spiral staircase. This time, the descent was not in darkness and silence. The rhythmic sound of the clock accompanied him, echoing softly off the stone walls. When he opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the square, the cold air felt crisp and refreshing. He closed and locked the door. Then he turned and looked up. The tower was no longer a dark silhouette. Its 4 faces glowed with a soft golden light, a warm gleam against the night sky. The snow continued to fall, and the flakes that passed in front of the illuminated dials seemed to glitter. He could see the sharp black hands against the bright background, moving. The sound of the ticking was not audible at this distance, but he knew it was there. The heart of the town was beating again. He stood there for a long time, just watching, feeling the cold on his face, as the clock tower, alive and luminous, watched over the sleeping town. The walk back to his workshop across the square was different from the walk there. The fresh snow had covered his earlier tracks, and the square once again looked untouched, save for the luminous presence of the tower in its center. The silence of the night was no longer a void. It had a pulse, an underlying rhythm that, while inaudible, was felt. The presence of the working clock changed the very nature of the quiet. Elias walked slowly, without hurry. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The image of the illuminated tower was etched in his mind, and the satisfaction of the completed work was a warm, calm feeling inside him. He reached the door of his workshop, shook the snow from his boots, and went inside. The warmth of the small room was welcoming. The familiar smell of wood and metal was comforting. He took off his coat and hat and hung them near the heater to dry. He went to the kitchen in the back of the workshop and put water to heat for tea. While he waited for the water to boil, he went to the window and looked out. His view of the tower was perfect from here. The 4 lit faces were like calm moons in the middle of the dark night. The snow falling in front of them softened the image, making it almost dreamlike. The water boiled. He made his tea, the steam rising from the cup and warming his hands. He returned to his chair by the window. He sat and sipped the hot tea. There were no thoughts of celebration or pride. There was only a sense of restored balance. Something that was still had been set in motion. Something that was dark had been made light. It was simple. He sat there for a long time, watching. The town continued to sleep, unaware of the change that had occurred in its center. But in the morning, people would wake up, and when they looked at the square, they would see the light, and then they would hear the first chime of the morning. The familiar sound, long lost, would once again be a part of their lives. The town's time would have a keeper again.
The snow continued to fall, each flake drifting down slowly, blanketing the world in an ever-thickening layer of silence and peace. And in the middle of it all, the clock tower kept its vigil, its light a warm landmark, its heart beating in a slow, eternal rhythm. Elias finished his tea, set the empty cup down, and continued to gaze out the window, feeling simply a part of that calm and orderly night.